The wind had stopped, but the mountain still held its breath. There, silhouetted against a slate-gray sky and a snow-blanketed ridge, a young bobcat clung to the top crossbeam of a rural utility pole. His body was crouched low, pressed against cold metal just inches from live wires that hummed softly with lethal energy. The creature didn't move,
No, I don't know what happened.
not even a
You need to
blink.
come down here right away.
It had been like that for hours, or maybe days. From the road below, Claire Monroe stood in the middle of her frozen gravel driveway, mug of black coffee in hand, her breath curling into the still morning air. She couldn't explain what she was looking at just yet. Her brain kept fumbling over the details. It looked like a cat, but much larger, wild, muscular, frozen in place 40 feet above the
It's getting
ground.
dark out here.
She squinted through the fog of her own exhale.
They should be done soon,
A
right?
bobcat? Here?
We got him. Be
Her
careful.
heart gave a strange stutter. Claire had lived at the
All right,
base
little
of
guy.
Larkspur
Time to go
Ridge
home.
for nearly 25 years,
Are you sure he's
long
dead?
enough to know every fox
He'll be
den
just
and deer
fine.
track along the pine-fringed edges of town.
I know this is hard.
She was no stranger to
We're
wildlife,
all here for you,
but this was something
just
different.
like he would have been.
Not just the sight of the animal, but the stillness of it, the weight. She stepped backward toward her porch, never taking her eyes off the shape on the pole.
Oh,
A
wow.
pit opened in her stomach.
Look at that.
Back inside, she fumbled for her phone and called Tom Gallagher. He was up early, usually plowing trails or checking traps.
Oh, my goodness.
Former lineman, he'd know what to do. You seen it yet? Claire asked without greeting.
Of course. It was
The
our
cat?
anniversary.
Tom's voice came groggy, then sharp. Yeah, I just got a call from Ellie down the road. Her dogs were howling half the night. She thought it was a mountain lion till I got out the binoculars. How long you think it's been up there? Judging by the snow buildup on the lines? Maybe 2 nights? A pause. No one's moved it. Not even a tail twitch. That ain't good. Claire turned back toward the pole. The bobcat hadn't shifted. It looked like a statue, a sculpture of fear. Who do we even call? She asked. Tom sighed. That's the problem. Sheriff says it's not his jurisdiction unless it falls. Animal control's not equipped. Power Co-op won't touch it without a shutdown plan. And the ranger station's short-staffed. Claire was silent for a long beat. We can't just leave it, she said. No, Tom agreed. We can't. By late morning, word had spread. A few neighbors began to gather at the edge of the icy road, bundled in layers, pointing silently to the unmoving form above. Nobody spoke loudly. It felt like a vigil. 14-year-old Ellie Price arrived with her sketchbook under one arm and a thermos of cocoa in the other. She stood beside Claire without saying a word, pulled out a stick of charcoal and began to draw. The lines came fast and confident. The bobcat's shape, the angles of the wires, the hush of waiting people. One of the older men, Walt, from the co-op board, muttered, "If we cut power, even temporarily, we lose heat to 38 homes. Middle of winter." Ellie looked up, soft voice cutting through the air like glass. "But he's alive." Everyone fell silent again. The bobcat blinked. It was the first movement anyone had seen. Claire let out a slow breath and realized she'd been clenching her jaw for over an hour. A choice was forming, somewhere in the seams of that quiet mountain road. It hadn't solidified yet, but something in the air was shifting. And high above, against the pale sky, the wild thing waited, not asking for help, not crying out, just existing, just surviving. And sometimes, that was enough to call people to action. The snow began again just after noon. Soft flurries brushing across the ridge like dust shaken from an old coat. It didn't fall heavy, but it dimmed the light, made the world quieter somehow, more fragile. Claire stood by her truck now, Engine idling for warmth, phone to her ear. Another hold tone, another dead end. Washington Wildlife Rescue, please hold. Third call, third transfer. The same loop of polite apologies. This wasn't standard protocol. This wasn't anyone's job. She watched as Tom helped Walt mark off a safety perimeter with neon orange cones and flagging tape. Not because anyone told them to, but because it felt like something they could do. Dozens of feet back, Ellie knelt in the snow with a second drawing, this one of the bobcat's face. Just its eyes and ears, and that strange, frozen intensity. The animal hadn't moved since morning. Tom approached Claire's window. I got through to the utility guys in Rockridge. One of them's a friend of mine, Benny. He says if they get official clearance, they'll shut the section down for maybe 40 minutes. But they'll need wildlife officials on site first. Liability. Claire let her forehead drop to the steering wheel. So we're waiting on who? Ranger station? The rescue group? Any of them, all of them. Doesn't matter who shows first, as long as someone comes who can take the lead. Behind them, a dark blue truck pulled in. Out stepped a lean woman in her late 30s, jacket marked with the regional forestry patch. She moved like someone used to being in charge, but quiet about it. She carried no clipboard, just a worn canvas pack and a look of deep concentration. Biologist Ortiz. She introduced herself, removing her glove to shake Claire's hand. You're the one who called? One of many, Claire answered. Thank God you're here. Ortiz studied the pole through a compact monocular. It's a male. Young, but not a juvenile. He's dehydrated. Probably terrified. But he hasn't panicked yet. That's good. Claire nodded slowly. What happens now? Ortiz turned to Tom and Walt. I need confirmation from the utility team. If they agree to shut the line, I'll coordinate the extraction. I've got a snare pole, crate, and blanket. We'll do it from a lift, if someone can operate it safely. Walt raised his hand. I wired that pole in '94. I still got my certs. I can run the bucket. Ellie looked up from her sketch pad, face red from the cold. Will it hurt him? Ortiz softened. It'll scare him. He'll fight it. But if we do it right, he'll survive. Ellie didn't look reassured. She went back to drawing. That afternoon passed like syrup through a narrow neck. The snow let up briefly. A plan was formed. The grid segment would go dark at 5:15 p.m. sharp. The lift would rise at 5:17. The Bobcat would be brought down, caged, and transferred to Ortiz's truck. If they missed the window, or if the Bobcat bolted, it was over. Claire stood with a thermos in her hands, cheeks numb, listening to her pulse in her ears. Somewhere between the silence, she remembered her late husband's voice. You can't save the world, Claire, he once said, placing a tired hand on her shoulder. But when the world lands in your front yard, you damn well better try. She hadn't thought of that moment in years. By 4:30 p.m., 30-some people had gathered along the road, standing in clumps or quietly alone. No one had been invited. No one had been told. They just came. With scarves and folding chairs and thermoses, with stories and silence. At 4:55, Ortiz did a final check of her gear. Walt climbed into the lift, boots thudding against the metal floor. The Bobcat didn't flinch. Claire turned to Ellie, whose charcoal-smeared gloves held the final drawing. It was stunning. The Bobcat's body against the wires, snow drifting, wires curling like vines. Ellie handed it to Claire without a word. There was a note scrawled in pencil at the bottom corner. He never looked away. Claire felt something tighten in her chest. She looked up again. The animal still hadn't moved. But now, he wasn't just a creature stuck on a pole. He was the reason a whole town had paused. He was the center of something none of them could name, but all of them could feel. The wind picked up again just after 5. Not hard, just enough to rattle the plastic flags tied to the sawhorses around the utility pole. Enough to remind everyone how fragile the moment was. Claire stood beside biologist Ortiz, watching Walt tighten his harness in the lift bucket. They both wore radios now, tuned to the same frequency. The plan had been rehearsed once, verbally. No second chances. Ellie sat cross-legged near the snowbank, staring at the Bobcat through her sketch pad. Her last drawing wasn't of the animal. It was of the rescue. Lift arm raised, wind curling around it, shadows of people below with their necks craned up. She drew everyone in silhouette, except for the Bobcat, which she had shaded in with layers of dark, living charcoal. 5:14 p.m. The hum of power along the wires suddenly stopped. No announcement, no countdown, just silence. It was eerie. Somewhere down the hill, a row of porch lights flickered off. One house generator kicked on. The rest went dim. 38 homes. Ortiz lifted her hand. Walt nodded from the lift. Ellie gripped her cocoa tighter. Claire's knuckles whitened around the thermos. The lift began to rise. The bucket ascended slowly, creaking slightly under the weight of man and metal. Ortiz stood inside, steady, cradling the long fiberglass snare pole. Walt guided the arm up with care born of decades on the lines. The Bobcat twitched, just a shift of the tail. Then its ears swiveled. Its body pulled tighter against the pole. Ortiz whispered into the radio. "He's aware, not bolting. Good sign." Claire couldn't look away. Her breath steamed in front of her, and she realized she hadn't blinked in nearly 30 seconds. Halfway up, the bucket paused. A test of weight, wind, silence. Then a burst of static. Ortiz again. Almost in position. The Bobcat raised its head slowly, golden eyes wide. He didn't growl, didn't hiss, just watched. Ortiz reached the pole's crossbar with the snare. Gently, slowly, she extended the loop. The metal of the snare was painted forest green. It looked like a vine reaching towards something sacred. "Easy," Ortiz whispered. "Almost there." At the base of the pole, a small group of locals stood together. Tom, Claire, Ellie, Walt's daughter May, and 2 more neighbors whose names Claire couldn't remember. None of them moved. And then it happened. The Bobcat sprang, not to flee, not to escape, but in pure primal panic. A twist of muscle, a lurch of claws, a desperate instinct to run even where there was nowhere to go. Ortiz's hand shot forward. The loop caught. The Bobcat erupted, yowling, a sound torn from some ancient place in its bones. The snare tightened around his shoulders as he thrashed. His paws lashed the air, catching only wind. The entire lift rocked. Claire gasped. Ellie screamed. Walt kept the controls steady. Ortiz held firm. The animal twisted again, howling with rage or fear, maybe both. His tail flicked dangerously close to the outer wire. "Hold him," Walt shouted. "I've got him," Ortiz growled, bringing him in. Inch by inch, she drew the Bobcat toward her. His body fought like wildfire. His claws scratched steel. His back legs kicked. But she didn't let go. Then, finally, the crate was there. A hard plastic transport cage, open and braced. Ortiz maneuvered the pole. The Bobcat thrashed again. But this time she twisted her grip, leaned hard, and dropped him into the crate in one practiced, desperate motion. Click. The door slammed shut. The latch locked. Silence returned. For 2 long seconds the lift hovered. Then Walt lowered them, the bucket groaning, the pole still shivering from the struggle. As they reached the ground, someone let out a sob. Ellie? Claire couldn't tell. Ortiz stepped down first, panting, sweat frozen on her forehead despite the cold. She crouched beside the crate. Inside, the Bobcat huddled in the far corner, panting, wild eyes locked on everything and nothing. Claire knelt beside her. He's alive. Ortiz nodded. And uninjured, I think. Stress is the bigger danger now. Tom crouched beside the crate and rested his gloved hand gently against it. You did good, boy. You held on. Ellie stood a few feet back, tears slipping down her cheeks. She said nothing, just slowly reached out and touched the crate's side with one charcoal-smudged fingertip. She left a black print there, a mark of witness. The mountain exhaled. The snow had started again by the time the power flicked back on. A faint hum returned to the poles, but no one moved. Not yet. Claire remained beside the crate, her breath rising in slow clouds, watching the young Bobcat from behind the plastic air vents. He was crouched low, his sides heaving, fur wet with sweat and snow. But he was alive. That word, alive, echoed in her chest like a bell. Ortiz zipped up her jacket and glanced toward her truck. We'll keep him overnight, let him rest. I've got fluids and food back at the station, though I doubt he'll eat. Tom nodded. Where will you take him? Up past Bear Run. There's a section of protected wilderness, no trails, no campsites. Ridge runs with rabbits. It'll give him a clean break. Claire looked over as Ellie approached, holding a folded blanket. Blue flannel with fading sunflowers stitched into the corner. It looked handmade. It's my grandma's, Ellie said softly. She used to use it for her cats. I washed it. He might want something warm under him tonight. Ortiz hesitated. Then she took the blanket and gently opened the crate's rear access. Without touching the animal, she slid the fabric inside. The Bobcat flinched, then settled back again. Not calmer, but not fighting. We'll give him some space, Ortiz said. I've seen animals come back from worse. This one's got fight. Claire stood, brushing snow from her knees. She looked around at the small crowd. Some neighbors had drifted home once the rescue was complete, but many lingered, talking quietly, passing around thermoses, eyes returning again and again to the crate like it held a piece of their own story. Walt stepped up to Ortiz and held out a small object. A broken fuse, burnt black on one end. Found this in the transformer box. Might have been what scared him up there in the first place. Pop like that, close enough to his path, would have sounded like the world ending. Ortiz turned the fuse over in her hand. Makes sense. He probably climbed the pole before realizing what it was, then got spooked and froze. And stayed frozen for 2 days, Claire murmured, afraid to move, afraid to die. Walt looked out across the dark trees. Can't say I blame him. That night, the town went quiet again. Porch lights returned. Generators shut down. Heaters kicked back on. But it was different now. Claire sat by her living room window long after dark, mug in hand, watching the glow of Ortiz's truck parked down the road. She knew the Bobcat was inside, resting on Ellie's sunflower blanket. It comforted her, somehow, knowing he wasn't alone. She looked at the photo on her windowsill, a black and white image of her late husband holding a fishing rod, flannel shirt flapping in the wind. They'd taken it up near Trout Hollow the year before his heart gave out. You'd have been proud, she whispered. The next morning came quiet and pale. Snow still hung in the trees. Frost etched the windows like veins of glass. Claire stepped onto her porch, wrapped in a thick robe, and looked up at the pole. The wires hummed again. The crossbar was empty. But she saw it in her mind's eye. The way he'd clung there, unmoving. The way his eyes had caught the fading light. The way a whole town had gathered below. Her phone buzzed. A message from Ortiz. Heading to release site at dawn. He's stable. No signs of injury. Will update after release. Claire replied with a single word. Thank you. She stepped back inside, poured a fresh cup of coffee, and placed it on the table beside Ellie's final drawing. The Bobcat, eyes fixed forward, standing in a forest of power lines that twisted into trees. At the bottom, Ellie had written a single sentence. Sometimes, it takes a whole town to let one wild thing go free. Claire smiled, and for the first time in months, it reached her eyes. They left before sunrise. Ortiz had packed her truck with quiet efficiency. Crates secured, water bottles tucked in thermal sleeves, emergency blankets folded in the passenger seat. The Bobcat hadn't eaten overnight, but he'd taken a few laps of water. His breathing had slowed. No injuries, no limps. Just exhaustion. Claire stood in her driveway in a down coat and knit cap, mug in her hands again. The light was barely blue on the horizon. She watched the red taillights disappear down the snowy road without saying goodbye. There was nothing more to say. The mountain felt still again, but not empty. Hours later, in the heart of the Gifford wilderness, the truck pulled off a service trail. Snow here was deeper, the pines thicker, their branches heavy with frost. The sky was streaked with silver light. Ortiz moved carefully, setting the crate down near a patch of frozen brush just off a game trail. Rabbit tracks crisscrossed the ground. She crouched beside the crate and paused. The Bobcat blinked at her. Just once. No sound. She pulled the latch. The door creaked open. Nothing. The animal stayed still for a long time. Then, with the grace of smoke, he moved. Slow, deliberate steps into the brush. Not a sprint. Just a quiet departure, as if he already belonged here. He paused once at the edge of the trees, turned, and looked back. Ortiz held his gaze. She didn't smile, didn't move. She just breathed. A slow inhale, a shared moment of recognition. Then he was gone. She stayed there for several minutes, letting the wind speak through the trees. Birds called overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a stream gurgled beneath ice. Life was loud when you really listened. Later that day, she texted Claire. Released. He looked strong, gave me a look, like he knew. Thank you all. Claire read the message from her kitchen. Her hand stilled over the bread dough she'd been kneading. For a moment, everything softened. The air, her breath, the ache in her chest that had been there since her husband passed last spring. She turned the message around in her head like a stone worn smooth. He looked strong. Back at the pole, the wires hummed again. Life returned. But something lingered, a feeling, a memory burned into snow and steel. Ellie came by that afternoon, carrying a cardboard portfolio. She'd printed all her drawings. You think we could hang one in the library? She asked. Claire smiled. We'll hang 3. One here too, above the mantel. Ellie hesitated. I keep thinking about that look he gave us. You know, when he turned back. Claire nodded. Me too. I don't know if it meant anything, Ellie said, quiet. It meant everything, Claire answered, even if it was just for us. And in the hush that followed, neither said another word. Because some things didn't need explaining. Some things just were. Outside, the wind moved gently across the snowdrifts. Not howling, not biting, just passing through, like a wild thing finally finding its way home. Snow fell lightly the next morning, blanketing the ridge and softening every sound. It was as if the land itself was pausing, listening. Claire opened her front door to find a small envelope tucked between the storm door and the frame. Handwritten, no name. Inside was a photograph. It showed the Bobcat mid-step, caught in a shaft of morning light just before he disappeared into the trees. His fur glistened with frost. His muscles coiled with intent, alive, free. On the back, one line had been written in neat, careful print. He walked like he had always belonged there. Claire held the photo for a long time, standing in the cold until her fingers went numb. Later that day, at the local library, a crowd quietly gathered in the community room. Ellie stood beside her makeshift exhibit of sketches, 8 in total. Each drawing traced the story from discovery to rescue. The final one, enlarged and framed, showed the Bobcat vanishing into a wall of trees, Ellie's charcoal capturing his silent retreat into the wild. Claire stepped forward to speak, though she hadn't planned to. "I don't think any of us expected to be part of something like this," she began, her voice steady but low. "But we were, and we didn't ask why. We just knew we couldn't look away." She paused. "He was just one animal. But somehow he reminded us that compassion doesn't need a reason. Sometimes it just shows up at your door and waits to see what you'll do." Applause wasn't loud, just gentle, warm, like the kind given at a memorial or a baptism. Afterward, Ellie gave Claire a folded piece of paper. "I wrote this last night. It's not a poem. Not really." Claire unfolded it. The handwriting was messy, but clear. "Some say animals don't feel what we do. They don't remember, they don't care. But I saw him look back. And I saw all of us looking up. And maybe that's what matters most. Not what we knew, but what we felt. And what we chose to do anyway." Claire hugged her. "It is a poem." That evening, back at home, she took the photo from the envelope and placed it next to the black and white image of her husband. 2 moments captured in time. 2 beings she had loved in different ways. Then she pulled on her coat and stepped outside, the cold biting but somehow comforting. The power lines buzzed faintly above. The same wires, the same pole, but they didn't feel the same. She sat on her porch steps and closed her eyes, listening. Not for the hum, not for the wind, for the memory of claws on metal, for the hush of people holding their breath together, for the cry of a wild creature refusing to give up, and for that one silent glance before vanishing. A look that asked nothing, but stayed with her just the same. The days that followed slipped by gently. Snow melted in patches along the roadside, and the quiet hum of daily life resumed. Children walked to school in the morning chill. Trucks passed slowly on the ridge. The bakery reopened after a frozen pipe repair. But something lingered in the town's rhythm, a kind of softness that hadn't been there before. At the general store, people spoke a little longer at the counter. At the diner, neighbors who hadn't shared more than a nod in years now swapped stories about the Bobcat rescue, as if it had cracked something open in them. Even Marshall Briggs, who rarely left the office, stopped by the library to see Ellie's exhibit. He stood there for 20 minutes without saying a word. Claire kept the photo near her kitchen window. Each morning she glanced at it like a ritual, that frozen moment of movement, that single step into freedom. One afternoon, Ellie stopped by with her father. He was quiet and broad-shouldered, a logger with sun-creased skin and hands that looked like they'd never held a pencil. He didn't say much, just gave Claire a nod and a brown paper bag. "Maple scones?" Ellie whispered. "He bakes. Doesn't tell anyone." Claire smiled. "Tell him thank you. They're already my favorite." Ellie hesitated on the porch. "I've been thinking about the rescue, about what it means." Claire leaned against the doorframe. "What have you figured out?" "It wasn't just about saving the Bobcat. I mean, that mattered. But it was like we all stopped for once, like we remembered something." "What's that?" "That we're not alone, not really." Claire nodded slowly. "That's a hard thing to remember sometimes." Ellie looked up. "Do you think he'll be okay?" Claire glanced toward the ridge where the Bobcat had once clung to the pole. "I think he already is." That night, Tom knocked on her door with an old photo album in hand. He'd found it while cleaning his garage. Inside were pictures from the early days of the co-op, the pole installations, the first winter storm they'd weathered, neighbors standing in knee-deep snow laughing beside fallen lines. Near the back was a photo of Walt, 30 years younger, smiling beside the very same utility pole the Bobcat had climbed. "Funny, huh?" Tom said. "That old pole's been part of this town longer than half of us." Claire touched the image gently. "And now, it has a new story?" They sat together flipping pages, sipping cider, speaking in low voices about things they hadn't talked about in years. Losses, hopes, what it meant to grow old in a town where most things stayed the same. Until they didn't. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and steady. Claire stood at the window and watched it gather on the branches. Somewhere out there, beneath the canopy of pine and shadow, a wild creature moved quietly through the underbrush. No collar, no fence, no watchers, just instinct, just life. And though he would never know it, an entire town had made space for him to go on living. Not because they had to, but because they could. Because, when the moment came, they chose to answer the call. No applause, no reward, just a quiet, shared understanding that every life, no matter how wild, how scared, how different, deserved the chance to keep going. And that sometimes, the smallest creature can bring out the very best in us all. A week later, Claire stood at the base of the utility pole. It was just a pole now. Steel bolts, wires humming above. The snow had melted around its base, revealing patches of dry earth and a single forgotten glove, likely dropped during the rescue. She picked it up and dusted it off, folding it neatly and placing it on the edge of the fencing. The Bobcat was long gone, back to whatever ridgeline or ravine had raised him. But his absence felt more like presence now, like the echo of something deeply real. Across the street, Ellie and her father were installing the final drawing at the community center window, a high-resolution print laminated against the weather. Beneath it, a plaque read, "To the wild ones, and the ones who choose not to look away." Claire felt tears prick the corners of her eyes, but they didn't fall. Instead, she smiled. One of those quiet, honest smiles that comes only after something hard has been endured and turned into something beautiful. The town had returned to its routines. School buses still rumbled down icy roads. Generators buzzed to life in the early hours. The bakery's window glowed warm again at dawn. But something invisible had settled in the air. A deeper kind of closeness. An unspoken agreement. When life presents you with a chance to do good, no matter how inconvenient, you take it. One night, as Claire locked her front door, she heard a sound far off on the ridge. Not a scream, not a howl, just a single cry. A voice cutting through the cold, brief and wild. She paused, then nodded to herself. That sound was not asking for help. It was a reminder of a creature that had held on when no one thought it would, of a girl who drew with her heart, of a town that gave up its warmth so another might live, of the stillness before a rescue, and of the look shared between a predator and a human being in a cradle of wind and silence. The next morning, Ellie dropped by with a sketch pad and a question. What if we wrote it down? The whole story. For others to read, to remember. Claire poured 2 cups of tea. Then let's begin. And they did. They wrote of frost and wires, of fear and stillness, of courage quietly given, of kindness offered without fanfare. They wrote of the day a town chose to pause, just long enough to save a life, and how in doing so it saved something in itself, a small flame of hope, a belief in each other, and in the wildness that still runs through all living things, free